This story happened a while ago, but it still messes with my mind. A side note, I live in a quiet countryside village where there's usually nothing happening. I'm an 18-year-old girl who can easily walk around my hometown alone without ever being scared because it's really safe here. There's basically no crime. So, as usual, me and my dog went for a walk one evening. It was nice weather outside, so I decided to go to a nearby field. I usually let my dog off of her leash there so that it was fun for the both of us. She's a nice dog and always comes when I call for her. We get to the field and everything's going really well and nothing seems off. Except that I have this kind of odd feeling in my gut that I never usually have. The last time that I did, I was 8 years old and we were driving at night with my family. I told them how I felt and they decided to slow down because I was oddly serious at that moment. A minute after I said it, a deer came running out of nowhere and we would have crashed into it if we had been going the same speed as a minute before. We were all shocked and my mom thanked me. I still remember it like it was yesterday. However, in the field 10 years later, I had that same gut feeling. Whatever, I thought, and I kept going, completely ignoring it. We roll around the fields and a nearby forest until the sunset starts to go down. I put my dog back on her leash and decide to leave from one of the tiny pathways that go through a small forest. It's the quickest way to get back home. It's not a popular way, but it is quick. As I'm walking along that path, I suddenly spot a silhouette in the end of the road, just before the forest begins. I think nothing of it at that point and just keep walking, but after just a little while I have a strong gut feeling and I stare at the silhouette. I look for a while and that's when I notice that the silhouette is staring at me without moving. I just think that maybe they were waiting for someone because at first, the silhouette looked like a child's. But as I got closer, I noticed that it wasn't a child, but a grown man instead, who looked to be struggling while attempting to ride a children's bicycle. It was a blue and green boy's bicycle. His legs were way too long for it and his whole body looked like he was forcing himself to ride it. It was a really unsettling sight. But still, my idiot self didn't want to turn around and have a couple of kilometers of wasted time. And even though it was creepy looking at it, I still thought, hey, maybe he's waiting for somebody that's coming from my way. But every step that I took, he followed me with an intense expression. I'm only like 20 meters away from him when he starts to do these weird jumps on his bike, smiling the ugliest and most unsettling smile that I had ever seen, just staring at me with wide eyes. He kinda looks like he was expecting something and is so excited about it that he needs to jump. He looked like he had to be in his 50s or something, with very long and thin legs and arms, bald and that creepy unsettling smile. That's when my alarm rings went off. I glanced behind me and nobody was there, just me, an 18-year-old small girl with her fluffy, definitely not a guard dog. I did a 360 turn and started to jog from where I came, just in case. I glanced at him and sighed in relief when I noticed that he wasn't following me anymore. I thought that maybe he wasn't waiting for me after all, and I called myself a stupid and a scaredy cat. Oh, I was so wrong. My adrenaline started to slow down again as I was in the middle of the fields, and I still saw no sign of him following me. I let my dog off her leash again and she started to run around. I'm nearly at the end of the field. I only have a kilometer or so to the forest part before I get to my home after the field part. And that's when my dog spots a rabbit or a deer or some interesting thing and flies towards it. I panic because she had never done that before and I yell for her. I yell plenty of times for her loudly and finally she comes back. I'm relieved that nothing happened to her, but as I put her back on her leash, I noticed something out of the corner of my eye. The freaky bald-looking guy with his long legs is biking towards me. He's not looking at the ground when he bikes, but at me. Freaking out wasn't enough to express my feeling in that moment, I have never seen a human who looks so crazy. More than crazy. What surprised me the most was that he was still biking though through a field. And I can tell you that it's not even an easy field to walk through sometimes. It has muddy ponds that you need to jump over, but that psycho just biked right through them. He was struggling a lot to bike there, but somehow managed to still do it. I didn't wait for another second before I started running. I ran so fast at full speed, and I have asthma, that I saw black and nearly collapsed. My lungs hurt so bad that I thought I was dying, but the adrenaline kept my blood running in my legs too. Once I glanced behind me and he was there, struggling badly to keep up his full speed on the field, with that ugly smile and the way too little bike. After that, I just ran like crazy until I found a house. I hid in their yard without even minding that I was in somebody else's yard. It didn't matter to me in that moment at all. I waited a while with my breathing still stuck in my throat, but he didn't come. I was planning to yell so loudly as I could if he found me, but he never did. At some point, the adrenaline started leaving my system and I left my hiding spot. I ran again until I reached an area which had multiple people in the yard so that I would have some help if I saw him again, but luckily I did not. I typed 911 into my phone, but I couldn't bring myself to call, mostly because I didn't have any proof, and I didn't want my parents to find out because they are overprotecting, so I wouldn't probably leave my house anymore. I still lived with them. I've been paranoid about this incident ever since, and my dog was frightened too. I guess she noticed that something was really off. I swear to God that I will always listen to my gut when it's telling me something from now on. I'm still scared of that man. I've expected to randomly spot him in some area, and I just think about what he could have done to me, and I'll never forget his awful smile. I feel like he's gonna jump on my window one night and do what he wants to me. I feel paranoid and helpless. I'm still thinking about calling the police. A 35-year-old female used to work at a small startup that had a small warehouse in the city. I enjoyed it because it had great benefits, perks, and a pretty easy commute. I just walked a few blocks to the metro line in our city. Usually I worked the day shift, so my walk to the station wasn't too bad. I just encountered a normal city life. On the occasional time that I worked into the night, I usually walked with some coworkers I knew, or then my boyfriend would come and pick me up. If I had to make the walk by myself, I would wear giant headphones to deter catcalls and any other annoyances. I had a doctor's appointment that morning and I was allowed to make up my shift by staying after the day shift crew had left. However, I finished my shift before the rest of the evening crew, which meant that I made the walk by myself that day. It was already dark and the street was pretty much deserted, except for this one really tall, burly dude walking just ahead of me yelling into his phone. I had my headphones on but nothing playing because I still wanted to be aware of my surroundings. The big burly guy sounded angry and didn't turn back to look at me until after he had yelled into the phone. I did my part and now it's up to you to get rid of the body. I don't care what you gotta do, just make it disappear. And then he turned around and stopped walking, looking at me surprised. I quickly stopped to not run into him and give an awkward grimace and smile, acting like I hadn't just heard him say that because I was listening to music. At the next crosswalk, I quickly crossed the street. He just stared, standing in place until I was a block away, and then he turned the corner and disappeared. I don't know if this guy actually knew that I was behind him and said that to scare me because he thought that I was listening into his conversation. I hope. Or he was up to no good. But that was super creepy. I've never walked to the metro when it was dark after that by myself. I either got a ride or had a buddy walk with me. I go on long walks near my home most nights. I live in a safe suburban neighborhood. It's a huge grid of residential streets in the middle of which is a big open park type area, about larger than 2 football fields that's next to a school. Last night around midnight, I was walking on the sidewalk next to the park, listening to a podcast, slowly making my way to the school. The school has a big well-lit parking lot in front, with 2 entrances and exits about 25 yards apart. As I neared the school, I noticed a car in the parking lot, with its headlights pointed toward the street. This is unusual for this time of night, especially on a weekday. Maybe it's a cop, I thought. I got closer and saw that it was a beat-up red truck. It had started slowly and aimlessly, driving around the lot. As I passed the first entrance, the truck seemed to notice me and stop. I got halfway to the second entrance when the truck rushed toward it. I assumed the driver wanted to pull out before he had to wait for me to cross. But no, the truck just sat there, idling as I approached. I got to the entrance and saw that the truck was occupied by 4 men. I motioned for the driver to go ahead, but while looking straight forward, he motioned me with his hands to cross. At that same time, I noticed a guy in the back seat, staring at me menacingly. I crossed in front of the truck, expecting the driver to blow the horn or rev the engine, basically just to mess with me. But he didn't. He just sat there watching me. I continued down the road, and as I was turning right onto another street, the truck had exited the lot, turning in the opposite direction. Just a strange encounter, I thought. A few minutes passed by, and I saw the same truck approaching me again. And getting to me would have required circling the park and traveling down 3 additional streets. And to do it so quickly, it would have required some serious speeding. The truck slowed as it approached, almost stopping as it got to me. The occupants stared daggers at me as they passed. It felt like they wanted to do something but lost their nerve. Now I'm a little bit freaked out. A big thanks to my wife for making me watch so much crime ID, I thought to myself. I'm not a paranoid person, so I started rationalizing their behavior. I told myself that they were just cruising around enjoying some weed before going home for the night. That wouldn't have been that out of the ordinary for my friends and me back in high school. But these guys, they looked too old for this, so my gut insisted that something was wrong. Out of an abundance of caution, I walked a little down the street and crouched behind a big oak tree surrounded by bushes on some random person's property. I know this is inappropriate and possibly dangerous, but I hope the homeowner wasn't watching me from his Ring doorbell as I lurked on his property. For a couple of minutes, I crouched there before I saw headlights. It was just the neighbor from across the street arriving home. He entered his house and I breathed a sigh of relief. I told myself that I was being ridiculous. I actually felt pretty embarrassed. Just as I was about to stand up, I heard the rattling of an engine and I saw headlights slowly moving down the street. It was the red truck. I'm sure that I imagined it, but that I thought I heard its brakes squeal right before my hiding spot. I wondered why this truck was apparently speeding to get to me and slowing when it arrived. It didn't seem like chance, and now I'm convinced that the truck was seeking me out. I started running as soon as the brake lights disappeared. I'm a little more than half a mile from home, and I'm not taking any chances. As I turned onto the street that intersected with mine, I saw headlights and heard a familiar engine rattle. I can't say with certainty that it was the red truck, but I immediately turned around and ran to the side of another random home. Making things more ominous was the spooky music and witch's cackle coming from the Halloween decorations next door. I waited another minute, making sure the red truck didn't pass, and I ran the rest of the way home. I walked in out of breath and my wife had asked me what happened. She scolded me for walking so late at night after I had told her the story. The middle-aged woman is strong with her, so she immediately pulled up the next door app. Apparently there had been several reports of car break-ins in our area attributed to men in a red truck. It's probably not connected, and I was almost certainly being dramatic. I doubt anything would have happened if I had encountered the red truck again, but still, I'm glad that I didn't. Hey everyone, this is a story that I only recently remembered again in a conversation with my fiancé. When I remembered this story, I was overwhelmed by an uncomfortable feeling, similar to what it was like at the moment. I never fully managed to figure out what really happened then, so I decided to share the story now. My older sister had graduated from medical school at the time, and my parents decided to organize a celebration for our family and friends on the occasion of that event. The celebration was held at a cottage of our family friends where we grew up, so I was very familiar with the space. Imagine a large and empty clearing, a large square surrounded by houses and fields between them. A narrow road leading to individual houses runs along the perimeter itself, and at that time it wasn't even fully paved. It was mostly just a dirt road. From that main road, which framed the houses in a square, you could go down into the dense forest that surrounded that square. The depth of the forest was great, and when you turned off the main road towards the path, you had to walk for a long time to reach the river, which was a few kilometers away. All this was familiar to me because I grew up there and spent a good part of my childhood playing in those woods. I was afraid of the forest, but nothing more than normal, and I was always careful not to stray from the path so as to not get lost. But back to the story. My parents had organized a celebration and invited a large number of people, including my cousin P. She and I were close in age and we got along well. As the number of people became tiring for us, we decided to take a walk so that we could go and catch up on life, just the two of us. We were both about 20 years old then, and I led her down the road because I knew the path that I wanted us to take. Down the perimeter, alongside the forest, next to all the other houses so as to not be alone. Everything was normal until we had reached one of the turns for the forest that I mentioned. Somehow we both stopped without saying a word and looked in silence at the path that stretched deep into the forest. Let's go inside. I was the first one to speak after some time, even if this is something that is not typical for me. As I mentioned earlier, I was always a little afraid of the forest, especially after I got lost in it once. That was when I was still a child, but they had managed to find me quickly after my screams rang out throughout the area. For this reason, I never left the road without my older friend, A, who carried a stick with him, and his hunting dog, May. But now something was different. Yeah, let's go in there, it won't hurt us, I said to my cousin and stepped inside. I don't want to, I'm scared, answered my cousin, but I persistently assured her that everything was fine, and in the end she still followed me because I was already 30 steps ahead of her. Elle, this isn't a good idea, let's go back. P tried to convince me once again, but I walked forward as if in a trance. Everything's fine, I repeated to her. After some time, when we were already deep in the forest, I finally stopped myself. I couldn't take a step more, I was paralyzed. It was as if a part of me tried to break away from whatever was pulling me inside. I was overcome with fear, my heart was pounding hard and my breathing had stopped. It was as if all sounds had stopped. It was daytime, but there was no sign of life, not a bird, not a rabbit, not a butterfly. Only silence and those trees that I had a feeling would stretch out their branches and trap me forever. And P was a few steps behind me. I'm going back, I can't do this. And she ran away the same way that we came in. Her voice was trembling and I could feel the panic in it. After another moment, I managed to break away and run after her. We ran without looking back as if something was chasing us until we had reached the entrance to the place from which we entered. A little further towards the cottage, we finally stopped as we finally felt safe, but we didn't look back out of pure fear. We tried to catch our breath, but only then did we talk as we were walking back home, fast and still scared. There was something there, we were sure of that. I wasn't afraid at first when I went inside. In fact, it was as if something was calling me, wanting me to follow it. But my cousin's frightened voice and presence tore me out of the trance. It had called me. I'm afraid to think what would have happened if I had been alone, and if there wasn't somebody to pull me back so I wouldn't go too far. I didn't know where I was going, I just knew when we got to that road that I had to go inside. It scares me, and I can't shake the fear that overwhelmed me and my cousin after that event. Any thoughts on what happened here? Why did I go inside and persuade my cousin to follow me? Why did she manage to snap me out of it, and why were we both so scared? There was no sound and no voice and nothing. Just the unspoken words of something that I heard and my cousin didn't. I've never spoken on this, not even to my parents or anybody around me. I'm a 22-year-old male, and this happened when I was about 14 or 15. My friends and I would always hang out at the local mall during our free time. One day, I had arrived earlier than my friends, and I was waiting at a seating area in the food court. There were a couple of couches around each other, and it was a common area for anyone to come and sit. So I didn't really notice when a man came over and sat at a couch across from me. I was sitting on my phone not paying attention until he spoke up and said something along the lines of, "Do you come here often?" I looked up to see a man who was in his late 50s to 60s. I told him that I did with my friends, and then he introduced himself. I still remember his first name as it was the same as my dad's. I didn't get an initial weird feeling. He looked normal enough, and I would have no reason to be weirded out by someone. So I told him my name, and we started making small talk. I'm a pretty sociable person, and I've been since a young age, so I was fine talking with what I assumed was just an older man wanting to chat with someone. He started asking me things that I like to do. I said that I enjoyed going out to the local lake and fishing and swimming. To which he said that he went out to that same lake every weekend, and he enjoyed fishing and swimming as well. I said that I enjoyed making music, and he said that he also liked to make music. I told him that I was an avid piano player, and he was excitedly telling me that he had a piano at his house. There were a few other things that I mentioned, and to everyone he said that he enjoyed doing the same thing as well. It all felt normal and right at first, but as we continued to talk, I kept getting a weirder and weirder feeling. It was almost like with everything he said, he was trying to prove something and win me over. He said that he had a boat at the lake and that we should go out sometime on it. He even said that he lived right across the street from the mall, and that I was welcome to stop by and play the piano anytime. Even going as far as telling me the complex that he lived in, and how to get there from the mall. He even said if I would like to, I could go over that same day and play his piano. With every passing minute, it felt like he was trying harder and harder to get me to hang out with him. Talking with him honestly gave me the weirdest primitive instinct feeling ever, like I was in the face of evil or bad intentions. After about 10 minutes of talking with him, I lied and said that my friends had arrived and that I was going to go and find them. He somewhat sadly said okay and wished me well. A couple of weeks go by and my friends and I go to the mall once again. We were all walking through the mall when out of the corner of my eye I see that same man, in a hoodie, walking past us in the opposite direction. We locked eyes for a split second and my heart immediately dropped. I didn't look back, and I honestly forgot about it not soon after. But for the next 2 or so months, I would keep seeing him randomly at the mall. I kept brushing it off as a coincidence, as there are definitely regulars at the mall who come often. So I really didn't think too much of seeing him, as he never spoke to me since that first day. I would just occasionally see him and he would be looking at me. I was naive and had a semi-weird feeling anytime I saw him, but I really just brushed it off. Well, that was until one day. I went to the mall with my friends and we hung out for a few hours before all leaving and going home our separate ways. I get home and I go into my room. Nobody else was home and I was by myself for a couple of hours. My mom got home around 7 or 8 and would come into my room looking somewhat worried, asking if I had noticed a guy outside. I said no, and then she showed me her phone. We have 2 cameras, one in front of the house and one in the back. About 20 minutes after I got home, somebody approached our house. We lived off a very busy street and our front wall blocks a majority of the view of the street, so we didn't see a car park or anything, just a man walking up to our house from the street. The camera was located near our front door looking out to the driveway, so as he got closer I realized it was the same man who I'd always seen at the mall. I immediately felt sick to my stomach. He came and looked through the front glass door and he walked over to the side of our house near our driveway and left the view of the camera. I remember that there was nothing on the back camera, so he had to have stayed by the side of our house for a bit. My room wasn't located over there, so I have no idea what he could have been doing. But he then came back around and looked through the front door again before walking away. I don't know if I was just too embarrassed or scared to say anything, but I said that I did not notice and didn't know who that was. My mom found it weird that he was looking in our house, but said that it could have been a homeless or a druggie because we live off a busy street with a bus stop right in front of our house, so we just went with that. My dad added more security cameras after this to deter people, and I never admitted to seeing him before. But after he showed up to my house, it was confirmed to me that he was following me around, and I don't know what his intentions were. He never came back to the house. We moved to a different part of the city not long after, and I was too far to go to that mall again. I haven't seen him since, and I wish to never again. For context, I'm 19 now and this happened when I was around 10 years old. I'm an 80% believer in the paranormal when it comes to other people's stories, but I am 100% a believer when it comes to my own. I have a few stories, but this is one that I have no other explanation to. I was probably 6 or 8 in this story, just judging on my bedroom. The layout is important, so please bear with me. As you walk into the hallway, it's the first room on the left. As you walk into your right is a straight wall. No bump outs, no windows. On the back wall, right in front of you is the window. To the left is another wall, but where you're standing at the door, if you look directly left, there's a bump out, where the closet will be at. That bump out is about 1 meter, maybe less. And then my bed is on the left wall as you enter past the bump out. My bed is positioned in the middle, with just the headboard touching the wall. As a kid and even now, I move a ton in my sleep, so I would be kicking the blankets off and waking up cold and having to reach and put them back on. Well, this night was no different. I had woken up cold and reached to my right to grab my blankets, and I had the urge to look at my door. And as I do, there's a kid peeking around it. A small black shadow that couldn't have been any taller than me at the time. I could make out a head, a shoulder, and a hand on the wall. I just went still, paralyzed with fear. Another thing to note that I do have 2 brothers, one older and one younger. They were with my dad at my grandma's house, so it was only me and my mom at home. When I saw it, I was scared obviously, but I didn't yell out. I didn't scream. I had to physically force myself to lay back down. And when I woke up that morning, I had kind of forgotten all about it. But it's only now that I remember it so vividly. I would see that boy often after that, always from the corner of my eye. Like when you would walk past a room and you would think that you saw something, but you would take a step back and look again and there's nothing. After we left that house in 2018, I didn't have any more of those. Another paranormal experience only happened about a month ago. I live in a small town in Australia, and I always take my 13-year-old Jack Russell mix for a short 20-minute walk down the road at about 7 or 7:30 at night. On this particular night, I had to take him a little bit later, around 8:30, as I had to work late and the sun was just setting to the point where I could see but not too well. That could have also been my poor eyesight, but it was enough to manage without needing a flashlight. Although I did have one on me, I just didn't want to use it. So we had just made our loop around a small community garden, and I was leaving the gate, so I looked to my right and saw a person in all black heading towards me. I was also wearing all black, so we both looked pretty suspicious. But out of panic, I crossed the road and headed left. They did the same not 1 second later. Now I'm a naturally fast walker, but I made myself go faster. All I had to do was cross the road one more time and turn right and go down a few houses, and then I would be back home. So walking faster, but not enough to where it was obvious. I crossed the road and turned right. This person didn't cross the road but turned right and stayed on the other side of the road. We were about parallel on the street. I knew that if they crossed, I could run and I wasn't too far from home. When I got into my yard, the person stopped across the road at this point. I realized the door was locked and I didn't have a key. The person stayed across the road, so I rang the bell, and I was pounding on the door. My older brother answered, and the person had just made it into our yard. My brother told the person to get lost, and he walked back the way we came. My brother asked me who it was, and I explained all of this to him. From this day, I take my dog for a walk before work now, early in the morning rather than after work and late at night. I do enjoy sunset walks, but for my safety, I've stopped, even after a year. I had just lost my job at McDonald's due to a massive flood, taking out a lot of businesses in my area, and I had a girlfriend that lived 30 minutes away. And I needed gas money, so I took a job offered to me by a family friend at a 24/7 gas station in the next town over from mine. The shift that I was hired for was 11 p.m. to 7 a.m., and I had never worked a night shift in my life, but I thought it would be pretty cool to have a little to no pressure other than to make sure the coffee was ready at 4 a.m. for the morning regulars. I was required to train on the day shift for the first couple of weeks, to get accustomed to the operations. Throughout those weeks, I learned many of the ins and outs of what takes place on night shift, and I also learned the ins and outs of the people that hung around the place for hours, and there were quite a few. One woman in particular, Melinda, would come in every morning before and after dropping her kids at school, around lunchtime, sometimes actually buying us lunch, and in the evenings when her husband was home. She came for hours, considering she lived a couple of streets over. She was nice, and I started to enjoy her visits, and we all got along so well in the store. It was a fun atmosphere for the most part. So it finally comes the time for me to work the night shift, and I had my manager with me for a few nights. I was taking her place on night shift because she couldn't do it anymore. She was nice, and I admit that I had a pretty big crush on her, so I don't mind spending the time with her at night at all. And I learned that when she worked the night shift, Melinda spent the entire night there. I had been working the night shift alone for a couple weeks, and some of those night shifts drug into the days when we were short-staffed, but again, I needed the money. Anyway, one night I was doing my chores, scrubbing the hot dog rollers, setting coffee filters up for the rush, and mopping the entire store. While emptying my mop bucket, I heard the chime of the door and looked at my watch and saw that it was 2 a.m., which was odd. There typically wasn't anybody coming into the store until 4 consistently, and I was a little bit upset because I had just mopped the floor. But I went out to see who it was, and just as I headed out, the movement in the mirror that was located overhead to stop shoplifters caught my eye. There was a man at the counter doing something with the money order machine, and upon looking again, he had a knife. He was cutting the wires for what reason I have no clue. While he was cutting, I heard him muttering, "Where's Bonka?" over and over again. I knew that I could walk back and get to the phone in the office, but I didn't want him to hear me, so I pulled my phone out and texted Melinda to call the cops, and tried to text quickly as much of what I could describe. She told me that she would be right down, and I was freaking out with every second that passed by. Before she could get there, the man went outside to the gas pumps and threw all of the trash cans and started to try and cut through the gas lines. I took this opportunity to lock the front door in case he tried to get back in, and thank God I did, because he immediately made a beeline for the door and slammed his fist into it. Just as he did, the cops and Melinda showed up and he was put into the cop car, while I explained everything that had just happened. Turns out Bonka was the name he called my manager, whose name was Bianca. He had become obsessed with her in the weeks prior, dropping in nightly and making her very uncomfortable, which explains why she couldn't take it anymore. They knowingly threw a timid 19-year-old into this mess, and seeing me there instead of her was what turned his obsession into rage. I didn't stay there for much longer after that, and I'm just happy that nothing physical truly happened. A female was 25 at the time. This was 2018 and I lived with my boyfriend in our hometown. It's a small city that's relatively poor and has some drug problems, and there's not that much to do. My boyfriend, now husband, was at his friend's house. It was a Saturday night and he said that he would be home around 9. It was about 2 towns over, a 20-minute drive. At the time, we lived in a duplex, split upstairs and downstairs. It used to be a big house that was converted into a duplex. My cousin actually rented the downstairs apartment, and she was kind of loud. I knew when she was and wasn't home. She wasn't home this night. The way that our street is situated, the backs of the houses on my street and the parallel street, they all faced a narrow alley, and the driveways were mostly only accessible this way. The downstairs unit had a front porch with a door and a side door. Our upstairs unit had the back door, and it was at the top of an outside set of wooden stairs. So anyway, I'm watching TV alone. I hear somebody coming up the stairs and knock on the door. It's about 8:30. It wouldn't be that unusual for my boyfriend to be home early. Maybe they got bored playing video games or he just felt like leaving. I usually would unlock the door for him when he came home instead of him using his keys, because it was dark and it could be a hassle. So I got up and opened the door to somebody who was not my boyfriend. It was a thin man wearing 2 big jeans and hoodie. He had about 4 teeth and was teetering back and forth. I was so shocked, considering that I was positive it was my boyfriend coming home. The guy at the door asked me, "Can I use your phone?" Behind him, down the stairs and in the alley, I see a big SUV Ford Explorer type of vehicle just idling, with somebody in the driver's seat. I panic and just say, "Yeah, hold on." I then shut and locked the door. I think I was more shocked that it was a stranger at my door and not my boyfriend than anything else. I hide so that he cannot see me through the front door's window, and I'm frozen. Something was just telling me that this was not okay. After a few minutes, I hear him start walking down the stairs. I go over to the door and see the car drive away down the alley. I call my boyfriend and tell him, and he says that he'll leave, but like I said, it was a 20-minute drive. He was about to leave anyway. After he got home, I calmed down and honestly felt silly. Why not just lend him my phone? Was it really that weird? But then I thought about it more over the next few days. It was 2018. This guy and whoever was driving between the two of them, neither of them had a phone. And it wasn't like they were having car trouble. What would they want a stranger's phone for? They also went down an alley into the backside of a house, up some stairs to ask for a phone. They didn't go to my cousin's front door downstairs. I would have heard somebody on the porch. They didn't go to any other house. I saw them leave the street entirely. Also, why go to a house to ask for a phone when there was no car in the driveway? And of course, our battery-powered security camera, it was dead at the time. I genuinely am not sure what they wanted. If anybody has any idea or thinks that I'm just overthinking it, let me know. But God, I hope I never see that creepy guy again. This happened when I was about 14 or 15. I'm 18 now. And for a little bit of context, I hated anybody touching my hair. And my mom would sometimes touch my hair and talk about how much she loved it because it was curly and thick. I would always be like, "You, Mom, don't do that." And it was like a mutual understanding that I disliked when people would touch my hair, even if they were family. So we're in Dollar Tree buying some snacks and stuff, standing in the checkout line, and I'm behind my mom just zoning out. And I feel somebody behind me toss my hair up and just start touching it, and was like, "I love your hair." Yeah, really creepy. Actually just came behind me and started touching my hair with no warning and complimenting me, like talking about how it was so thick and pretty. And like, "Thank you, but Jesus Christ, come on." My mom kind of brushed it off and was like, "Yeah, I know you don't like when people touch your hair, but I was mortified." Thankfully, this hasn't happened since then. But don't sneak up on a teenage girl and touch their hair with no warning. It's freaky. And plus, to make it even more weird, I realized that at the time my hair was very damaged because I was bleaching it a lot. It was not pretty or well taken care of. So I don't know why that guy touched my hair anyway. I moved into my new house about a year or two ago. I had lived in the area for a year before we were evicted due to the owners of our old house wanting to move in. I'm a young female still living with my family, which makes this story even more weird. Now, when you look out my window, you see my fence and then a house. They are up on a small hill, so the fence does not block anything. The first encounter that I had with this man was late at night. I was with some friends while all of our parents were out at a party. I would say that me and my friends are old enough to be left at home. We were fairly responsible. We were just relaxing in my room with no light or music on. We had turned the TV off when we were alone. We heard my dog start barking for a good 10 minutes. We passed this off because she barked at absolutely everything. I'm talking birds in the power line, bug on the front porch, anything that moves pretty much. We started hearing weirder noises like crunching, circling the perimeter of my room and scratching on the walls. I kid you not. The moment that we start getting scared, the loudest bangs that I've ever heard start pounding on my glass sliding door. Me and the 3 others run out of my room to go look at what in the world could be making this much noise. We were greeted by an aggressive dog. This dog was up on the glass, pounding on the door. My dog was scared. She usually doesn't do this, but she backed away behind me into my room, with all of her fur on end. And then we see it. A man dressed in all black standing at the door. We were all standing perfectly still, but I guess my friend's flight response went off. And just as she jumped to lock the door, the man reached for it too. My friend yelled, "What are you doing here? Who are you?" He responded with the simple, "I don't know," and walked off with his dog who was on a leash. When our parents got back, I told them about him. They asked us why we didn't call them. Truthfully, I know that we should have, but I didn't want to ruin my mom's birthday party. I have learned from this though. 2 days later, my mom confronted our neighbor who was mowing the lawn. He said that it was in fact him and that his dog had run into our gate and he got the dog back. He said that he meant to come and talk to her earlier about it, but he didn't. I thought it was a normal story until I thought back to that night. The gate that his dog supposedly ran through had a tough clasp that was shut on that night. We have it there so our dog can't get out and so nothing can come in, but you can open it by hand. Meaning that this man opened the gate and let himself and his dog inside. My theory is that he heard the music stop and didn't see lights from his house, and so he decided that he was going to come and, rob us. The noises that we heard must have been him, scaling the perimeter of my room for 10 minutes before attempting to enter. And we filed a police report and nothing happened for a few months until one night. I was in bed almost asleep but still getting comfy. I sat up to rearrange my pillows and turned around so I could properly make it comfy when I saw a face outside my window staring back at me. Whoever it was wearing a black face covering, and I texted my mom and froze. I heard moving and then my mom came and checked, but there was nothing there now. This wasn't just my imagination as my neighbor's lights are visible from the crack in my curtain, but the face was covering a majority of the light. Ever since then, I've noticed them watching, and whenever I catch them looking, they get up from their balcony and they leave. But I'll catch them in the same spot watching only 5 minutes later. And during my sophomore year in high school, I was unfortunately involved in a terrifying event at my school. It happened during lunchtime, and I'll never forget what unfolded in front of me. Right before the bell rang, I heard what sounded like somebody slamming lockers as hard as they could. The noise echoing through the halls, and before anybody could think, a kid ran down the hall screaming, "He has a gun!" Now mind you, it was close to the end of the year, so sadly a lot of us thought that it was a messed up senior prank. The reason I say this is because over the past few months we've had kids apparently posting on Facebook that they were going to do this to the school. Therefore we had police officers in our classrooms guarding us non-stop throughout the second semester. So when it actually happened, we didn't know if it was real or fake. Our security guard, who was previously a sniper in the military, ran down the hallway to see what was happening. Not even a minute later, he comes running back to tell us to run, and we did. Kids were jumping over tables, jumping over each other, and teachers were trying to pull kids into their classrooms. Everything broke loose the moment that we realized this meant life or death, and all I could think about was, where's my sister? She had left for the bathroom moments before the first shots rang out, and I remember not knowing what to do. Do I find her or do I hide because the gunman was coming right for me? And so I ran as fast as I could up the stairs and into my 4th period class. The teacher, I remember everybody was staring at me, like what was going on? Are you okay? And that's when the principal got on the intercom, and I'll never forget what he said. "This is a code red, hide your students. I repeat, this is not a drill. Hide your students." I didn't even have to say a word. The senior class I ran into took action. They barricaded the door with the desks and chairs after pulling in as many students as they could. The teacher told us to turn off all our phone sounds but to text our parents. When I did, my mom so happened to be right around the corner from the school. She raced over despite me telling her that it wasn't safe. I felt like I could have gotten my mom killed that day, and I still regret it, though she remained safe. A lot after that is a blur. I remember my sister texting me and telling me that she was safe, but that the gunman was trying to get into their classroom. I remember hearing the SWAT team clearing the hallways and hearing on one of the radios that there were multiple suspects, but none could be found. I remember seeing on a multiple Snapchats, teachers next to doors ready to take action. Some had scissors, others had baseball bats, and another showed students taking off their shoes, ready to attack anyone who entered without permission. Though being slightly wholesome, the school of people should never have to defend themselves against angry classmates with guns. That was something that should have never happened, especially on a day that our guard was down. Long story short, we were on lockdown from 1:45 p.m. to 10 p.m. that night. The shooters were never found as far as I know, and nobody was fatally injured. Thank God. Walking out, though, to see food and papers scattering the hallways was rough. We had to have our hands up in the air as we left the school, and before going outside, we were all patted down to make sure that we didn't have any weapons. My parents hugged me harder than ever before, and me just being happy that we all walked out to see another day. I dropped out of high school shortly after that and moved back to my hometown 5 states away. I lived with my brother for a bit until I got my own place, and that's when I met Devin. He was like 3 years older than me, and I never realized that he was my first grade crush's older brother, but there we were. He was pretty good friends with my brother, and they would hang out when we would have kickbacks. I can't say that he was a bad guy from what I saw, and he never had beef with anyone. A super laid-back stoner type of guy. It was really cool until we all got drunk one night and it slipped that he almost shot up his high school. Now everybody there pretty much knew this about him, but played it off as well. He didn't actually do it, so even my brother. I was disgusted when I told him what happened to me and they dropped him from the friend group pretty fast. It's just sad that it took me telling them that I was actually involved in one to no longer be friends with him. Like people, you shouldn't have been friends with him to begin with. Anyway, so I moved again and no longer talked to any of those friends, including my brother, and that's something that I'm not sorry about. It's been almost 10 years and I'm slowly moving on. I just wish the trend of validating other people's bad behavior would stop. It's not a game, and if you ever feel the need to take these drastic actions, please don't. It's not worth ruining your life and others. You have a chance to make things right, so please do it. So recently, I had a few encounters with a delivery guy. First, he asked me, "Are you, my full name, from my previous address?" You moved," while smiling creepily. I thought that he was just a delivery guy that was trying to do small talk, so I brushed him off. I do live alone, so I thought that I was just overthinking by getting creeped out. But then I realized after I thought about it that he was my neighbor in my previous address. He striked up a conversation with me saying that he knows one of my friends. I don't like talking to strangers, so I didn't talk with him long, but it stayed with me because I felt uncomfortable with him, like I felt he was dangerous. After that, I was going out and I saw him again delivering to my neighbor, and I ignored him trying to walk by. He saw me and recognized me even if I was wearing a mask and asked the same question again. After that, since I don't go out much, I don't see him as often. There was this one time that he was standing in front of my neighbor's house, but I just walked by him. And then I saw him in my Facebook friend requests and just ignored him again, but I was obviously creeped out, so I told my friend that he said he knew me. At first, my friend said that she didn't know anybody with that name, but his last name made her recognize him as a son of a family friend. They never talked. His family didn't know that he was working as a delivery guy, and he was laid off because he became obsessed with his boss, which was older than his mom. I also lost my keys, so I asked my landlord for a replacement. I didn't think much of it until I got home to my door being open. Obviously, I was cautious, but there was no one at my apartment, so I sighed in relief, thinking that maybe I had left it open. I work night shifts, so sometimes my mind is all over the place. Now that I'm thinking about it, I overlooked a lot of things, and I'm thinking about installing a CCTV in front of my apartment. I'm still scared though because he knows my address. Also, my friend told me to report him to the police, but I'm too scared because they might just let him go and he'll take revenge on me. He also told me that he might be doing drugs as told by his family since he's acting suspicious. The most that I can do right now is change my locks and install the CCTV in front. Wish me luck. In 2018, I lived with my partner and my German Shepherd in the Humboldt Park neighborhood of Chicago. I was 33 years old and our apartment was a 4th floor walk-up unit, a very typical low-budget Chicago rental in a changing neighborhood. The layout of our building is going to matter to this story. Our building had a total of 12 units. Mine and the 3 below me had a shared front entrance, and the other 8 units were through a second entrance. All 12 apartments had connected back porches and stairs that shared a walkway to a rear gate, which led to an alley. From the front stairwell, there are windows on each landing to the back porches, so you can see the back door of my apartment when standing at the front door through that window. We had good relations with our neighbors, especially those that lived directly below us and shared our front door. This was the thing that saved all 3 of us, my partner, my dog, and me. My partner was in a touring band at the time and would leave for weekends or weeks at a time. It was a scary thing for me because I had been attacked and stalked by an ex in my teens and 20s. I always worried that something would tip him off and he would start stalking me once again. A little less than a month before a 2-week tour my partner had scheduled, I received a creepy Facebook message from that stalker ex from yet another new account. About a week after that, my car had been broken into. The glove box was emptied. Things were thrown around, but the only thing that was taken was a bag of dog treats. I had about $20 in change in the compartment between the seats, and they left the money alone. I was on high alert at that point, and very scared about the time that I would be alone during the tour. My partner was kind of irritated with me and the situation, and that felt it was too last minute to cancel, especially over what amounted to be a bad feeling and a few isolated things that weren't direct threats. And truthfully, car break-ins are very common in Chicago. It's happened to me like 15 times, and the police usually do the reports over the phone and don't even come out to the scene. What I found really strange was that the thief didn't take the money. There was a homeless man who had started camping on the boulevard nearby recently. So my partner left for his tour and I set up cameras and bought door braces for my front and back doors. I became completely nocturnal, unable to sleep at night. My poor dog developed diarrhea, maybe because she was picking up on my stress level. It meant that I was taking her down all 4 flights of stairs for her to go blast her bowels 6 or 7 times a night. I had the distinct, prickly, crawling sensation of being watched when I would take her out, but I couldn't tell what was genuine and what was my own fear and paranoia. Her diarrhea lasted an unusually long time, like 3 or 4 days. I was going in and out the main door a lot, feeling very scared, and I noticed that some of my neighbors wouldn't pull the door all the way closed, so the lock engaged. I mentioned it to my downstairs neighbor one day, including that I was extra careful because of the stalker. He was supportive, said that he had mentioned it to the other neighbors if he saw them, and I noticed that the door was locked more frequently after that. My partner came home at about 11 a.m. on a Sunday morning. At about 8:30 that morning, my first floor neighbors had been broken into. He was a metalhead dude who collected instruments, sold weed and psychedelics, and lived alone. I guess he went out for breakfast and he left his door unlocked while he was gone. Somebody had come in, eaten the leftovers in his fridge, took a coat and a pair of boots, and left a filthy coat and pair of boots. Took his college diploma but left $500 in the same cabinet. They left all the expensive musical instruments and mixing equipment. Left the drugs but did take a set of keys. The keys were to the first floor apartment and a master key for the front door and the back gate. My neighbors ran into each other right after the break-in, and the second floor neighbor said, "Make sure you go and tell me because she is a stalker." So my metalhead neighbor came up to let me know what had happened. My partner had just gotten back from his tour when he knocked at the front door. I jumped out of my skin but looked through the peephole, recognized him, and the 3 of us stood on the stairs at my front door while he told us about the break-in. We jabber-jawed for a while, about 15 or 20 minutes. While we were talking, we heard the front door open and close below us but thought nothing of it. and then we saw a man climbing up my back porch steps to my back door through the window. There was no other apartment that he could have been going to, and he had to walk past all 11 more accessible units on his way to mine. He wasn't my stalker and I didn't recognize him, but his image is burned in my mind. He was wearing flashy black and white high-top sneakers. His black coat was oversized and hanging off his shoulders. We locked eyes through the window when he froze halfway up the stairs to my back porch. He slowly took his cell phone and called someone as he slowly turned around halfway up the steps. He walked back down the stairs in artificially slow motion, like he was pretending to be nonchalant, and then bolted into a sprint as soon as he hit the porch below mine. My neighbor ran downstairs and dialed 911. My partner and I ran through the apartment to the back porch and saw a sedan and a windowless van pull out from the sketchy building 2 doors down. Both cars floored it out of the alley. We didn't get the plates, but the cops said that it wouldn't have mattered. There wasn't any crime committed and nothing concrete to justify stopping them. And they very condescendingly explained this to me as they took my statement later. My neighbor is the one who actually made the call and had the police report. My partner and I were just considered witnesses. For a long time, the thing that scared me the most was the tool that my neighbor found when he went running downstairs. It was a 2x4 piece of wood cut to about 2 feet, but about 6 inches of it had been made into a handle. It looked like a paddle, and for a long time I couldn't figure out what it was, but I'm pretty sure it was a ram for the door jamb or locks. When I looked at my door afterward, it looked like the frame had been repaired, like it had been broken open before. It seemed like they used the one master key to place the ram, get somebody at the back door to catch me if I tried to run out that way, and somebody else was going to come back around since they only had one key, and they would break in my front door and go forward with whatever they had planned. When we caught them before they could catch me unaware, they seemed to have aborted the plan. I suspect that they had been watching me, especially while I was taking out my dog, and figured that I was alone. It was pure coincidence that my partner had gotten home 30 minutes before all of this. I feel that we all could have been horribly injured or worse had we been trapped inside, and they had gotten the jump on us. Nothing else ever came of it except that my landlord refused to change the locks, but he did agree to let us out of our lease. I moved out of Chicago and now I've added a younger dog that I'm training to do some bite work. My house is surrounded by cameras and floodlights and wingnut neighbors. It's been about 10 years since this happened, but I still remember things pretty clearly. I should note that this is told from my perspective, and I wish that I could get my mother's perspective on it as well. She just doesn't remember the events as well as I do. For context, I lived in a mid-sized city in the southern United States, where the main thing to do at the time was go to the mall. Sure, we had movie theaters and a couple of bowling alleys, but besides that, there really wasn't much to do in the city. My mom worked at a department store located in the mall, and having nothing better to do, I would often go and sit in the break room while she worked. It gave me a reason to get out of the house, and if I wanted to, I was allowed to walk around the mall or get something to snack on in the food court. Honestly though, I was shy and preferred to just stay cooped up in the break room, playing video games on my Nintendo 3DS. My mom's coworkers were generally very sweet to me, and frequently popped in to say hello, or just to check on me during the downtime. If I was lucky enough to go with my mom on weekends, I could usually convince my mom to pick up my friend. We were actually dating, but since we were both girls, I didn't want it to get out, to come along with us. Going to the mall meant that I was free from doing chores at home, and it was a cheap way to sneak a secret date in every now and then. My girlfriend, though, never really liked staying in the break room with me. She always wanted to go walk around the mall. I should note that she really enjoyed taking walks, so it wasn't out of the ordinary to want to do so at the mall as well. I just didn't like walking as much as she did, so I tried to weasel my way out of it whenever I could. I could usually convince her to just walk over to a nearby store and look around her to go grab something from the food court rather than walking. But I noticed pretty quickly that she wasn't trying to actually get me to walk around. She just didn't want to be in the break room. Now, my girlfriend was more perceptive to things than I was, and I assumed she just didn't like the ambience of the break room for some reason. For a little while, I let it go, but eventually I got frustrated and asked directly what was really bothering her about the break room. I thought she was going to tell me that it was too cramped, or the lights randomly cut off and made her uneasy. These things bothered me too about it, but no. What she told me was that she heard things in the ceiling, like somebody was walking around in there. I had learned from my mother that there was a room in the ceiling, but it wasn't for walking around. It was for maintenance. Most of the stuff in there was wiring and insulation, but technically someone could go up there. So I told my girlfriend this and said it was likely an employee up there to fix stuff. She said that that was fine, but she didn't really like it and still preferred walking around or sitting in the food court. I understood her discomfort and wanted to help, so I agreed. We had a really good relationship in the sense of communication, and though I got frustrated, I wanted to make sure that she felt comfortable. Later that day, I mentioned what my girlfriend had told me and asked what they were fixing in the ceiling. Though my mom just looked distressed and said that they hadn't been up there fixing anything that day, but she wanted me to see something. My mom took me into the receiving room of the department store, which was just a room off in the back filled with boxes and random junk the store was going to put out for sale. The layout of this room, though, was sort of an L shape. One part of the L was used for receiving, but the other part was the way into the ceiling. I should clarify for this next part that to get into the ceiling, the store would have to call for the mall's maintenance team. They didn't have a ladder or anything on hand to climb in there, as it would have been a safety hazard. The only thing that this particular area had was a hatch that led into the ceiling. That was it. So needless to say, I was horrified to see what appeared to be claw marks leading up the wall to the hatch. I still remember the way that they looked. Brown gashes that had been dug into the concrete wall of the receiving room. I asked my mom if it was a prank, but she told me that this wasn't the first time that it happened, and she had no way of knowing that I would even ask about it. According to her, these weird carvings had shown up several times over the course of a few months. Each time, the store would call in the mall security and maintenance teams who would clean the wall up and then go into the ceiling to investigate. Nothing had ever come of their searches, though, and they would eventually give up dealing with the marks. The only explanation that mall security could give was that it was likely a homeless individual who had made their way into the ceiling by sheer willpower and happened to be very good at hiding during the searches. I stopped staying at the mall with my mom after that, and any time that I wanted my girlfriend to come over, we found somewhere else to go during the day. Sometimes she would just come over to my house and we would watch TV or whatever, but I didn't feel safe going back to the break room after that. I knew that nothing had happened up until that point, but I just didn't want to risk it, honestly. So to whoever or whatever was walking around in the ceiling at my mom's workplace, I hope we never meet. I had a pretty creepy experience with my friends in the woods this past weekend. So for some context, me and my friends like to be in the foresty part of my stage and just hang out there. It's more peaceful to us and cooler looking. Anyway, when we got out there, we normally go down this one road that's pretty out of the way from everything. No houses on it and no streetlights, and it stretches for miles with thick woods on either side. This one night, it was just me and my one friend who has never been down this road before, so I decided to show it to him. We start driving down it, and I'm pretty far into it when I see a reflection of what looks like a license plate of a car. So I'm confused because cars are never on this road, especially not at this time of night. So I decide to go a little bit past it, and it turns out to be a practically brand new Mustang sitting on the side of the road. So I find it strange and I turn around and I go home. The following weekend comes around and me and my friends who frequent the road go down it, and the Mustang is there again, but this time it's in a different spot with a white towel sticking out of the window. We find it odd and check it out to make sure that nobody needs help or anything, and the inside looks new as well. So we brush it off but keep it in the back of our minds. The next day we go back and it's again in a different spot, but still has the whole white towel sticking out of the window. So this time I take a picture of the plates and try to run them, but notice that it's parked in the only spot on the road where there's no service. Which is really weird, so we start driving back towards home to get a connection, and I run the plates but nothing comes up. So we decide to stake out the car and see if somebody comes to get it. So that night rolls around and we're sitting in my friend's car trying to look at this Mustang that's about 100 feet in front of us, when me and my friend decide to get out and go take a look with our flashlights. We walk up to the car. There was nothing weird so far and we heard nothing. Like there were no bugs or anything. We decide to walk into this little clearing in the woods and take a look around. As we're standing there screaming, "Hello," and "Hey, we like your Mustang," we start to hear whispers and see movement. And then all of a sudden, me and my friend think that we hear our friends talking. So we start to run back to our car, and we hear footsteps behind us following. We get back and they said that they hadn't been talking that loud, and from that far away we wouldn't have been able to hear anything that they were saying. My friend driving decides to drive up to the side of the Mustang to where his lights are shining on the driver's side door, and my one friend jokingly starts to video. Later on, we check back on the video and you can clearly see a person standing there in the woods. And there's another person that you can't clearly make out hiding behind a tree. When I get home, I'll try and post the video, but I know it sounds hard to believe, but really, this was all true. Luckily, we didn't venture that much further into the woods, and if our friends were talking or not, that weird occurrence saved us.